I'm sure many of us have seen the barbaric footage of what's been happening in Israel, and some of us will have seen the very, very graphic footage of torture, murder, and other crimes against humanity. And I want to try and describe some of the things that I've seen on the videos that have come out of Israel. In one of the videos, there are 3 men. They don't seem to be armed, but there's bodies lying by the side of the road that have been stripped naked. They've been murdered. And these men are urinating on them and then kicking them afterwards. Other scenes show Israeli civilians, families, entire families, men, women and children that have just been machine gunned by the side of the road. Other videos show the bodies of Israeli civilians being paraded around Gaza to cries of Allah Akbar, which means Allah is great. I'm going to say God, because the God that they worship is certainly not God. And then there's one scene that is probably the most disgusting scene of all, and you can't really tell exactly what's happening in this scene. There's 2 young children in the back of a car. There's a woman. By the look of her, she looks like she's probably their mother. And it's difficult to see exactly what's happening. Is she being raped? Is she being murdered? Is it both? Whatever it is, this woman has been brutalized in front of her 2 young children who look absolutely terrified. There's other footage of these young people who've been taken away from the rave. They're bound, they're gagged, they're terrified. There's footage of rooms, of bodies, of men, women and children. And we're seeing some of the stories coming out of Israel now, of what these monsters have done. They've gone on a rampage of murder, rape, mayhem, mutilation and torture. And I hope that every single one of those men that carried out those attacks is dead and suffering right now. And I'm talking about suffering beyond the grave for what they have done. And why am I making this video? I'm not making this video to be voyeuristic, because that's not why I watched the clips that were sent to me. I'm making this video for the people, the fools, the English and Irish and Scottish fools who are chanting, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." That's what that means. It means the rape, murder and mutilation of innocent Israelis. That's what you're signing off on, you absolute scum. You're a disgrace. That's the first point I want to make. I was at a demonstration on Friday outside a migrant hotel. Incidentally, the men who are carrying out these mutilations, these murders and these rapes are young Muslim men. Guess what the majority of the people coming into our country are? Yeah, you guessed it, young Muslim men. We don't know who they are, we don't know where they come from, we don't know what they believe. But we know one thing, they share the same religion as those savages that have gone on a killing spree in Israel, killing men, women, children, raping women. No doubt raping children as well, because that's okay for them, isn't it? They're just following what their prophet did. Yes, his child bride Aisha I'm talking about there. We could go on talking about Islam, but I'm not going to. I'm talking about the savagery that's happened in Israel when those maniacs broke out of the Gaza Strip. And I hope Israel does not back down. I hope they go into the Gaza Strip and they punish the terrorists that have done that. And they punish them severely. And I hope that some of those hostages survive and are released and come back to their families. But for the scum in the West, the leftists, the so-called progressives, who will not condemn Hamas, who are waving their little Palestinian flags, shame on you. You're worse in some ways than the terrorists, because you'll do everything from behind a keyboard or waving your little flag. You've never put a uniform on of any shape, many of you, because you're cowards. In your nice little soft liberal world with your soft hands and your soft voices, you're as bad as the concentration camp guards. You are scum. You are disgusting. You are deplorable. You need to hang your heads in shame. But I've also a word for the British government, for the Irish government, for all the governments of the EU and even for the United States, who are opening their borders to whoever wants to come. How do you know? How do you know you're not importing the very people that have just carried out this murder and this mayhem? You don't know. You don't know, and that's the problem. You don't know who's coming into your country. And remember ISIS. What first got me involved in political activism, I was quite happy living a quiet life, earning a nice living and trying to do the best I could. And then I saw what ISIS were doing. I think it was 2014, 2015. And I realised we had a wave of hatred, murder and mayhem coming towards us. That there was a darkness in the midst of us. And that darkness is still there. Now this is according to the security services, well over 30,000 people in this country who would carry out those sort of attacks if they got the chance. And this is my shocking prediction. It shouldn't really shock anyone. But this is what I predict will happen in our country. If we continue to support Israel, which we should, it's right to support Israel. Israel, the gloves should be off. Israel should be allowed to go into the Gaza Strip and do whatever it needs to do to bring security to their land. And that's going to be messy, and there's going to be a lot of bloodshed. But you know what they're not going to be doing? They're not going to be raping people. They're not going to be kidnapping children. They're not going to be using civilians as human shields like these scum in Hamas do. I walked into a Hamas demonstration, I think it was 3 years ago. It was during COVID. I was in London. And been out for a couple of drinks with friends and walked straight into a Hamas demonstration. It was vile. They were disgusting. These were Englishmen, Muslim Englishmen, saying that they despised Lee Rigby. They didn't care about Lee Rigby, saying that they spat on his grave. These are Muslim men wrapped in the Hamas flag, wrapped in the Palestinian flag. And then we've seen it tonight. Outside the Israeli embassy, a mob of fanatics celebrating the murder of innocent Israeli men, women and children. That is what is in our midst. That's what Tony Blair let in. That's what Gordon Brown let in. That's what David Cameron let in. That's what Theresa May let in. That's what Boris Johnson let in. That's why people voted for Brexit, because the normal people of the UK could see what was coming. But I've also got a word for the people of the UK. What does it take to get the normal Englishman or Scotsman or Irishman or Ulsterman on the street? I'm not talking about the hardcore few that have dedicated their life and their time to doing this. And there are some good men in all of those countries who are taking a stand, but there's not enough of them. Because you know why? There's a lot of men looking the other way. Because you're cowards. Because you don't want to get your hands dirty. You don't want to get out on the streets and stand for what's right. And I'm not talking about doing anything illegal. I'm talking about standing up for what is right. Speaking out, going to demonstrations, stop being cowards, grow a backbone. Because you know what? Your children, your grandchildren are going to suffer because of your cowardice, because you're more worried about how much money you had in the bank and whether you can afford to go to Spain next year than getting out on the streets and standing for your country. Many's a time I made speeches when Tommy was going through his trials at the Old Bailey, and we were talking about grooming, and I said, where are the men of England? 1 million girls raped by savages, no different to those men that have murdered and raped women and children in Israel. Savages no different to them. Raped up to 1 million girls in England. Have we forgotten about the Ariana Grande concerts? Have we forgotten about Lee Rigby? Have we forgotten about Borough Market? And thankfully there's some brave men. Thankfully there's some brave men. Think of Roy, the Millwall fan, the Lion of Millwall. We think of the policeman, one that gave his life in Parliament, and the guy, I forget the guys' names, but I think one of them was called Palmer, Keith Palmer, and I think there was another one called Wayne Doxley. And a good friend of mine, I'm not mentioning his name on the video, a good friend of mine who was involved with us in 2017 when we were doing this, knew both those police officers. One of them was a black police officer, the other one was an ex-army veteran. One gave his life, one was very, very seriously injured. And the Lion of Millwall, who stood there and was ignored by the great and the good because he didn't fit the profile of what a hero's meant to be anymore. White middle-aged men don't make very good heroes anymore. Don't know what they do with Winston Churchill these days. Well, we know what they do with him. But anyway, I don't want to get off track on this video. Our country is facing an absolute catastrophe. And we've talked about this before. But what would the British government do if jihadis, even if they were only armed with knives and axes and swords or whatever? I'm not even talking about jihadis armed with firearms. But if 30 or 40 jihadis came into a town, organised and started rampaging and murdering men, women and children, what would the authorities do? How would they cope? See, Israel is one of the best armies in the world, and look how long it's taken them to flush out those vile, disgusting jihadists. I hope they're all dead. I hope every single one of those jihadists is dead. But how long would it take the British police, the British Army, the very, very small contingent of special forces that most of them are probably abroad deployed anyway, how long would it take to bring that under control? We are completely defenceless when it comes to that sort of attack. Not saying it'll happen, but I'm sure people in Ascalon and in southern Israel and bordering the Gaza Strip never thought it would happen to them. Well, it did. I'm sure the people that were in Borough Market that night never thought it would happen. Well, it did. It did. And we've got to be ready and we've got to be prepared. And I think the men of England need to stand up. Of all races, of all backgrounds, need to stand up and say, we'll stand against this menace that may well come our way at some point. And I hear all the excuses why people won't do that. And I want to finish this video. It's been quite a long video and I apologise for that. But I think sometimes you've got to say a lot. And I would imagine, because of the content of this, I would imagine it'll probably be up for about 5 minutes and YouTube will ban it. But hey ho, YouTube don't like the truth. But on a positive note, I heard from an Israeli friend of mine who's an impeccable source connected with the Israeli, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, and he told me about an off-duty man from a special unit, and he was in one of these towns that was attacked by the jihadists. He was in a kibbutz, and he had his own firearm. So he started engaging the enemy. And of course, he knew the ground, he knew the area. He planned for this. He knew that this might happen. He had the foresight to plan if something happened in his home, near his home, what would he do? Well, this is what he did. He started killing jihadists on his own. And he ended up killing 30 jihadists. He ran out of ammunition with his own weapon. He then managed to get hold of one of the jihadist weapons and a couple of magazines. He carried on fighting, carried on the engagement. Then he ran out of ammunition again. And he ended up with a knife, one-on-one with jihadists, up close and personal. That man survived the engagement. He lived to tell the tale, according to what my friend told me, and he's a good source. That man survived. And that's what happens when someone's trained, they're motivated, and they know what they're fighting for. And we need to realise that sooner or later, our country is going to face the same fate that Israel has just faced. Our country is going to wake up one morning and there will have been an absolute catastrophe the night before. Far worse than anything that's happened yet. Are we prepared? Are we ready to stand up? And of course, a lot of this is conjecture. But I think it's well-informed conjecture. Think about it, 30,000 jihadists in our midst. They're the ones that the security services know about. There may well be many more. And when it happens, are we going to be ready to stand and fight and protect our country? See you all soon.